At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Today's episode of the Meaning of Trees podcast goes deep, because in meeting with Clandon Wood natural burial ground owner and TEDx speaker Simon Ferrar, I touch upon the themes of our own mortality as human beings, and how trees and nature provide us with comfort and reminders of truth when it comes to accepting death and decay as part of our lives. Before recording this interview, I took a walk around the peaceful and thriving setting that Simon has nurtured over the past 14 years, and you'll hear what's so different about this special place that he looks after, and exactly the kind of legacy he hopes to leave. One that, in his words, looks after the living just as much as it takes appropriate care of the dead. Morning, Simon. Thanks for welcoming me to Clandon Wood Natural Burial Ground, where we've just had a walk round and I've been absorbing the restorative and contemplative surroundings that you've created here from what was a farm field 14 years ago. I'm in awe of what you've achieved here and really interested to understand the thinking and the design and the purpose behind this place. So thanks a lot for joining me today.
My pleasure.
I want to know what trees mean to you.
When I knew we were going to be doing this, I'd never actually consciously thought about what trees do mean to me. And having given it quite a lot of thought, actually, in quiet moments, it's changed what trees mean to me. I never actually knew they meant anything to me other than them being trees. And I suppose it goes back to childhood with a lot of us. I'm a baby boomer, so we didn't have anything electronic to entertain us. So generally we were out on our bikes in the woods, climbing trees and making camps. The importance of trees to me were a campsite that you could create of your very own. And you could make a different one every day if you had the time. As I've got older, I think differently about trees. As you know, Clandon Wood, I was going to originally cover it with trees, but the more research I did, it became evident I needed more of a diverse landscape for a nature reserve. So that's why we moved the trees to perimeter and created a wildflower meadow with ponds and wetland. And the trees, going back 12, 13 years when we planted them, they were just 2 meter standards and bare root, and they are maturing. But maturing in a very early sense, because it's a very new native woodland. They're all trees that belong in this part of the country. Now, I lived for a long time in Addlestone in Surrey, and there is the crouch oak, which you probably well know. They reckon that's over 1,000 years old. It's still living, albeit it's hollow and there's still life to it after 1,000 years. They reckoned it was perhaps the boundary of Windsor Forest back in the day, and there's tales that Queen Elizabeth I picnicked underneath it. How they know that, I don't know. But looking at that and looking at mature trees around the Surrey Hills, to me, trees now, they are silent sentinels, if you like. They are there witnessing us passing through. And yes, I know a lot of them don't last 1,000 years, but there's quite a few here that are quite a few hundred years old in and around Surrey. And you look at those and you realise actually that we're only here for a very, very short amount of time. The old trees are like that silent witness of how we're passing through. And sometimes I feel very sorry for them, the way we've treated them in the past. I think we're developing a lot more respect for them these days. The new trees we put in, hopefully, the longer lasting ones, the oaks, the beeches, they will be here for quite a few hundred years to bear witness to what we've created here as a natural burial ground. And I suppose by doing what we're doing here, it's a reflection also of what life and death means. It is a living place, without doubt. There's nothing funereal about it. It's very much a living place. But it also reflects the four seasons in nature reflect our lifespan, I guess. Spring, being born, the summer growing and being nurtured, and then autumn, coming to the autumn years of our lives. I mean, we even say that. And then winter, when everything dies back and ready for the regrowth in spring. But that dying back, the trees shedding their leaves and then rotting down and becoming something else. That's really, the way I view of what we're doing, using the land as a natural burial ground, the way we've done it for thousands of years. We've kind of got used to this convention of a few hundred years old of how we as human beings should address death and be with death and what death should look like. And a lot of my dialogue now is taking us back to how it used to be and the importance of ritual, not just the funeral ritual, but the ritual of how we die, how we prepare for death, and how we cope with that as human beings. And I think if we can do it through nature, it reflects how things should be.
So if that's what trees have become in terms of their meaning to you now, what would you say death means to you then, Simon?
That renewal. I'm not a religious man, but I guess I can be called a spiritual man. And Clandon Wood's done that for me. And seeing that kind of life, growth and death in nature, that's all we are. When we die, we go back to the earth, hopefully. If you be cremated, it's kind of a slightly different version. But with a natural burial, you're going back to the earth. Your actual main body, what you call yourself, is actually your body. In my view, that's not you. If I cut my arm off, I'm still me. If I cut my other arm off, I'm still me. All the time I'm alive, I'm me and not my body. My body goes back to the earth. It becomes something else. It becomes part of Clandon Wood. And I'm very comforted, as a lot of my families are very comforted, because they tell me that they are pleased they've decided to come to Clandon Wood because they know where they're going to end up. They're going to be part of this place, part of these 31 acres, the trees and the meadowland. Where our spirit goes, to me, nothing dies. So where it goes, I don't know. I might be able to come back and tell you at some stage. But
yeah. Well, thanks for having a go at answering
Pleasure.
that. And I think death is a topic that people find challenging to face into, particularly in a heavily industrialized society, I think, and one that is secular and capitalist. We have quite individualistic ways of looking at things, and death forces us to acknowledge some of the commonalities between us, between all living things, actually, and it forces us to face into some of those wider parameters and physical limitations that we often like to try and deny. As an example, in our sort of fossil fueled society, where, putting a man on the moon is seen as a great achievement, but actually it's quite far away from what has long been our fundamental life cycle and kind of activity. And something like Clandon Woods, I think, is much more reminiscent of what probably has always been the case in terms of what truth looks like. And perhaps we have invented ways to try and circumnavigate the inevitable. But I find it really fascinating that actually what this place is providing is something that remains relevant and attractive today in the context of thinking about death and what our last ceremonies might look like and where we might be laid to rest. But how that is a bit different to the norm, isn't it?
it has changed people's perceptions. People that have come out here not knowing what to expect. So it's not a cemetery with standing headstones, as you've seen. It's a completely natural but managed landscape.
Yeah, could you tell us a bit more about almost the practicalities of how it works? So contrast how that's different to your typical kind of...
Your conventional cemetery.
Exactly.
Yeah. So The conversations that I want people to have is understanding how we got to where we are, why it's got to this conventionality of how we dispose of our dead, and bring it back, as I say, to a way not so many generations ago where families were caring for their dead at home. Family got together, neighbours got together, community got together, cared for the body, got it ready for burial. The local carpenter will probably bring the coffin down to the house and they will have a gentle procession up to graveyard. It's that connection, that care that I want to try and get back to families to understand. Now, that extension of that care and connection, Clandon Wood is an example of that. Why do we put people in churchyards? Well, I can understand from the religious side of that, but why are we putting them in cemeteries where the cemetery has got a single use? That's all it'll ever be as a cemetery. It's not designed to be anything else. And once it reaches capacity, it has to be looked after or not. Local authorities generally haven't got the money these days to carefully look after a cemetery. But if they do, it's heavy in labour and it's heavy in machinery. They tend to use insecticides, herbicides to keep it looking pristine, if you like people expect a cemetery to be. And having that single use, the land is no good to anybody else for the foreseeable future and into the centuries ahead, probably, until perhaps they start reusing the graves, which they have started to do in certain parts of London in older graveyards. Whereas if you have a natural burial ground, it's got an actual purpose. It's got a purpose to exist and a reason to be looked after. Now, as I said earlier, I've got a nature reserve here, and that's how I've interpreted that dual purpose. A lot of farmers diversify now with hay meadows. That might be an orchard. So we've got 31 acres of a sustainable, permanent green space. When people purchase a plot here, they pay £250 into a trust fund. That's a one-off payment, and that trust fund will build up. Now, by the time all the plots are sold here, that trust fund should be in excess of £7 million. So you have a permanent green space, a sustainable green space, and there's a large amount of money at the end of it because all of our landscapes are managed in some way, shape or form. We're trying to manage it as best we can to attract as much natural wildlife here as possible. So there's no reason with the trust fund in place that Clandon Wood should not be a nature reserve for centuries to come. There's no reason for it to be used for anything else.
So when we were going around the site just now, definitely it was an environment that felt a bit different to me. So there were familiar things in terms of what you'd see in a nature reserve. It's quite a young habitat, I guess, 14 years young, but already thriving with life. We've got ponds here. We've got species-rich meadows, loads of it. We've got fringes with trees, hedgerows growing out, laid hedgerows, which are brilliant for wildlife. And then we've also got young woodlands here establishing and also young orchards as well. And so it's definitely got that sense of kind of hope about it and still evolving.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
And at the same time, of course, what's different for me is that I was looking out for how the burial side of things might play into things here and how that might be integrated, and certainly with those sustainable principles as well. So I wonder if you could just explain for our listeners a bit of the nitty gritty of, what's a natural burial all about?
The only thing that's same is we dig a hole and we place a body in it. But that hole is a lot shallower than generally you'll find in a cemetery. One burial only, 3 foot 6, 4 foot deep. It's dug over size and we line it with hay. One thing is very easy on the eye. If anybody's ever been to a burial in a cemetery, some of the graves can be very, very deep, can be up to except 4 coffins deep. That could be 12 or 13 feet. They are dug just big enough to take a coffin. And if you ever stood by a fresh 12, 13 foot grave, you can't see the bottom of it. It's quite scary. And if it's your only experience of burial, it puts a lot of people off. They go, I don't want to be buried. Oh, I want to go for cremation or whatever. So I like to say it's easy on the eye, it's kind to our hearts, and it's very gentle to our world. Having spoken about how we look after the land, we're very careful about what we put into it as well. So the coffins or shrouds. You don't have to have a coffin when someone dies, as long as the body's wrapped in some way, shape or form. Probably the most popular is willow. We try and get people to use English willow. Woven in Somerset. It's reinvigorated the basket making industry, I tell you. Things like plain pine, anything that's natural, hasn't been treated. Bamboo, they use some exotic sea grasses and things like that. Or what I'm going to have is just a plain cotton sheet. Go out this world the way I came in, wrapped in a cotton sheet. It's a cotton sheet, but it's got a backboard. So that, when you're being loaded into the grave, the practicalities, if you can imagine.
Well, I wouldn't actually know, but obviously.
Yeah, so the body bends in the middle, even though it's dead.
Right. Isn't it called a stiff often?
Yeah, they're not that stiff. Yeah. I wasn't sure how far we're going with this podcast. Yeah, so that's the difference in the actual physical burial side of it. But it works from a natural point of view because it's a shallow burial. The body will break down quicker and return to the earth then a lot quicker. The other thing, Tom, is about memorials. So a lot of people go into a cemetery and they expect to see standing memorial. We don't do that here. As you've seen, if you walk into Clandon Wood, you would not know it's a cemetery. It looks like a nature reserve, feels like a nature reserve. There's no standing stone. So people want to memorialise a grave, they can. They're just plaques that the face of it is laid level with the ground. We stipulate that they should be of a biodegradable material. Some are more durable than others, like Welsh slate or Northumbrian slate, or a wooden plaque laid flat in the earth. Or people can hang a small wooden memorial, leaf-shaped memorial in a tree. And that's it. There's no additional grave goods. There's only one memorial per grave because we want people to buy into the fact that this, first and foremost, is a nature reserve. We do have full burials and the burial of ashes. Now, ashes can be a very damaging material on wildlife. So a lot of people don't realise if ashes are scattered or dumped in a lot of places, it has a very detrimental effect to the wildlife. Not just the growth, but actually the wildlife that's living on that growth. There have been a couple of naughty families, extended families probably, that haven't signed into what we're trying to do here and dumped ashes that they probably had at home. If they're scattered, it looks like someone scattered cement across the meadow. If they're dumped around a tree, it rains and it goes off like concrete. I've broken some ashes apart around a tree and the first 4 to 6 inches of the tree bark had died. And everything that was, all the grass and flowers underneath it had also died. And because they'd died, whatever was living on them was also not there. So it's a very bad thing to do, is to dump ashes on top of the soil. To me, if somebody wants to scatter ashes, really you should ask the landowner's permission. But I would say if it's a favourite dog walk, for example, perhaps scatter them on a path. That would be fine. You can scatter them in running water, in the sea, or in a river that's running. In Surrey, we reckon about 90% of people that die go for cremation. A lot of people, and this is what people have said to me, I didn't know you could still get buried. I didn't know there was enough land until they found it Clandon. They think it's more of a sustainable process, which at the moment, it's certainly not sustainable with gas cremators. Electric cremators are coming into use, but until we're producing enough green electricity, then still that is not sustainable. They're burning fossil fuels. Some of them have got filters that have been abated for mercury filters and things like that. Those filters still have to be dumped somewhere. And there's still stuff, NOxes and that going into the air and other particles that have to be dealt with. And in my view, the amount of time that crematoria can give people, half an hour, 40 minutes to tell someone's life story, queuing up to get in, being pushed to get out. A lot of people describe it as a conveyor belt. Not a great term. But one of my big things at the moment is, do people know that you don't have to have ashes? This is what we've become used to. To me, what bone is left after a cremation, I'd much rather have that back as a memorial of someone, of my loved one or a friend. Perhaps it's not for everyone, but it would certainly suit the burial process here at Clandon Wood a lot better.
What would that
to
actually
have
look like?
remains. In a fire cremation, you would have some of the larger bones, fragments of the larger bones.
Yeah.
Everything else is burned off. The coffin's burned off, the clothes, everything else is burned. All the soft tissue is gone. The bones are raked. What's left, you might get a large leg bone or something, or part of it, or one of the large flat bones of a pelvis or the skull. And they are raked out of the cremator. They get put into this, what's called a cremator, which is basically a machine that crushes the bone and gives you the ashes. I would much rather have those back than ashes, but people don't know this stuff.
Is it true that a lot of burials in the world today involve concrete?
Yeah. Have you listened to our TED talk?
I've heard you talk, yeah. But I didn't know about that.
A lot of new cemeteries, particularly, the ground's cleared, trenches are dug, and they're lined with concrete. They're particularly in areas where there's water problems, the high water table or whatever. But in a lot of cases, especially in the States, it's a matter of course because it's convenient. So they're concrete chambers. They might be complete concrete chambers. So the coffin might not even be sitting on earth. It might just be sitting within a chamber. They've got concrete lids, and there's acres of these things. They're grassed over, and when someone wants to use the plot, then the grass is cut, the lid's taken off, the coffin's placed inside, and the lid's put back on. So there's no biodegradation. The body's not going back to the soil. To me, it's going back to the way we kind of live our lives these days. There's no thought on consequence and what it means to us as human beings. To me, this is a very spiritual place because it's natural, or as natural as can be. And families have said to me what this place means to them. And I've never, ever heard anybody say what a cemetery means to them in such glowing terms. I've had people say to me, you have no idea, Simon, what this place means to us and what it means to our family. I had one guy saying, it has changed my outlook on life and death. And that is so profound, or whatever word you want to use, for it to change somebody's outlook on life and death.
Yeah, it's a really humbling environment. And in preparing for our interview today, I always think about with my guests what kind of commonalities we might have. And I think for you and I, one of those is that through our work, whether it's you directly kind of managing death processes here and facilitating, ceremonies for people to help with their grief process, and also pointing them towards perhaps a bigger picture that life does carry on, even if we like to put certain endpoints at certain intervals when the body dies. For me, I work obviously closely with ancient and veteran trees, and trees of that nature, like the oak that you mentioned earlier, they force you to acknowledge that life and death are one and the same process. So they force you to look at how decay actually gives rise to renewal, and it creates opportunity as well. And I think that both of us face into some degree of acknowledging death every day. And I think that's a healthy thing that perhaps our society doesn't allow us to do as often as we might do. Would you say that's a fair comment?
Definitely. Yeah, I hear it almost daily, the fact that people don't want to talk about death or dying because so many reasons. It frightens them. I think probably fears a lot of it. They don't know how to address it. And if we have more of an understanding, an insight as to what happens when we die and what happens after we've died, and how we address that for ourselves, but also how we address that within our families, within our communities, and how we grieve. To me, the conventionality of the last few generations, where the funeral process has almost been, to me, taken from us and dealt with by professionals, if you like, if you want to put it in a term like that. Whether that's been forced upon us or whether we've allowed it to happen, I think it's probably a mix of everything. We've allowed it to happen. It's been provided for us with perhaps the corporate arm around the shoulder saying, don't worry, we'll look after it for you. We'll look after it all for you. You don't have to worry. At a time of a death and when you're grieving, that might sound favourable. But actually for the grieving process, we need to understand we can do this stuff. So I've had 5 funerals up to date, Tom, of my own. I've had events here called Come to My Funeral to show people what a funeral might look like and the things you have to think about. So my family know what my funeral looked like. They know what it sounds like. My funeral director, who I know, knows what my funeral looks like, knows what it sounds like. My celebrant, who will be performing the service, knows what my funeral looks like and what it sounds like. They know I will be having a gentle procession to graveside with a horse and cart. If they'd been to more than one of my funerals, they would have seen my grave open.
Have you had the same ceremony 5 times over?
No, I've had a different coffin. I've had I had a mushroom coffin this year. I've had a willow coffin. I've had a cardboard coffin. I've had a shroud, just to show people what, the difference. But actually, I like the way that the Muslim tradition is that the final gift, the body is picked up by, say, 3 or 4 members of the family, and 3 or 4 members of the family are in the grave. And the body is handed down and placed down by hand. It's not lowered. I love that. It's like that final gift.
Yeah, it's very
that literally laying that body to rest.
It's a very human act, that is it?
Yeah.
And we've spoken a bit on the way round about some of the history of this site, and that got me thinking about perhaps some of the historic traditions that might have played out here in previous cultures around death and ceremonies. And I did a little bit of research into older death-related traditions, and one of them that stuck out to me actually was that in Neolithic times, bodies were laid out for the birds and the animals to take from before the bones that were then later buried in a east to west facing barrow as a nod to sun and moon worship. So I found that quite interesting. But yeah, in terms of the settlements that have been uncovered here through the archaeological reports you've had, have you thought about what other customs might have played out locally at some point?
It's interesting because when we did the archaeology here, it was shown that there's an early Bronze Age settlement here in Clandon. On the land where we have our glass pavilion, where we have our services, there was an early Bronze Age roundhouse. And talking to the local vicar of West Clandon, the church up there is about 800, 900 years old. And he said that there was probably some sort of religious site up there because it's a little bit higher than the land around here. Quite conceivably, the early Bronze Age people were worshipping up there. Over the meadows, we get the sun rising in the east over the meadows, goes completely over the site and then settles behind the church at West Clandon. So who knows? They had their roundhouse and they were watching the sun come up very early in the mornings. And it still means a lot to people. We have summer solstice celebrations here. We have sound bath meditations during the full moon and things like that. So it still means a lot to people. But to think somebody was using this land, living this land, grazing this land because they found evidence of enclosures, so that it looks like perhaps they were keeping animals here as well. The people were using this land all those millennia ago, much as we're using it now. Perhaps they were burying bodies here as well. I've not invented anything new here. We've been caring for our dead in this way for thousands of years. And not only is it a responsible way of caring for our dead, to me, this is a very, very, very responsible way of caring for the living, and not just us as human beings, as nature.
Yeah, and that sustainability factor and just the feeling as you walk around here of the care and the way that it's alive and thriving must bring so much comfort to the families that have to say goodbye to their loved ones here. Just moving back to trees briefly, I've got a bit of a provocative thought to share with you.
Go on, I like provocation.
I want to see where you go with this.
Go on.
So I read a book in the last few years called The Nutmeg's Curse, and it was kind of looking at extractivism, colonialism around the world. Specifically, it was about the story of the nutmeg tree and how, cultures were displaced for the people in power to get their hands on this really valuable spice.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a side note. But in amongst that, there was a thought shared by the author, Amitav Ghosh, and he said that sometimes he's thought that maybe it's not the case that humans are in charge and winning against nature, if you like, but actually with trees playing the long game, maybe they will win out in the end by basically feeding on us lot when we're gone and we return to soil. And I just found that a really interesting.
To me, that's not provocative, Tom. That's something that could quite easily happen. I mean, look at 2020,
the pandemic.
Yeah. Nature thrived. It only needs someone mad to switch the lights off in whichever way, shape or form it happens. And we're back to the Stone Age. We'll have to adapt with nature and we'll probably come back again if we survive it all. But to me, if humans don't survive, then nature wins out. I mean, you look at how nature thrived when we weren't around it in 2020, 2021. It was just astounding. I had to come here because I was part of the front line. But coming here on empty roads, hearing everything that's normally drowned out by planes or traffic or whatever. And then you just see nature taking over the roads. And it's just astounding how, not just how adaptable it is, but how quick it takes over. And you've seen how we manage the site here. We cut the meadow once a year and that goes for hay. But we do have to manage certain areas where we leave refuges for wildlife. But the boundaries, they were 2 or 3 times the depth of that and encroaching onto, graves and everything else. We have to manage those. But it's within a year, it's just incredible. You've seen the graves that have been dug and the fresh graves that are perhaps a year, 2 years old. We haven't had the weather for the wildflowers to grow back yet. But within 4 or 5 years, the meadow grows through and you would not know there's a grave there. We obviously know where everybody is. We've got that recorded, but visually. So I don't think that's a provocative statement at all. I think we're treading a very fine line.
Yeah.
And if we don't get it right, then the trees are there as silent sentinels waiting.
Well, I think what he even extended to was he said, maybe we've got it wrong and the trees are gardening us, human beings, by still holding an appeal and with a longer term gain,
Perhaps.
An interesting thought, that one, isn't it?
Mm.
So we're moving towards the end of the interview. And one of the questions I'm just going to throw in the mix is, if I were to think about my own death and related ceremonies and planning around that, what would be the main couple of things that you'd ask me to consider?
Admit you're going to die. Recognize that you're going to die, because most blokes I come across go, don't care, I'll be dead, put me in a bag, throw me in a skip. Well, one, that's not very nice for your family and it's also not legal. So recognize the fact to yourself that you are going to die. What surprises me more than anything, I think, when I'm doing presentations and talking to people, is that most parents will care for their children, care for their family throughout their life. Financially, the mortgage protection, insurance, and the health insurance, and all these other things. And yet when it comes to the last bit, people don't put anything in place. People won't have a will, won't have power of attorney, and won't put into even place about, I want to be buried or cremated. If they're not making that decision, families just are at a total loss at a time where they're grieving, at a time when they're stressed, at a time when they're frightened, having to make decisions for somebody else. So I would say, decide what you want for yourself. Look at your decision and see what impact that might be having to the environment. It might not be your first consideration, and talk to your family about it.
I've actually got another question for you.
Go on.
So there's a lot of talk at the moment about biohacking, and I suppose that's been a age-old human.
What's biohacking?
So biohacking is like, it's chasing eternal life in a human way.
Yeah.
So largely billionaires, in fact, are spending literally millions every year on certain supplements or practices that they feel is going to extend their life by decades. And genuinely, they're in search of options that will help them live forever. What are your thoughts on that?
As a human being, you're going to die at some stage. And if you haven't got any human bits left, then you're not human. So all the time we're flesh and blood. We're going to die at some stage, however long you try and prolong it, I guess. And what does that prolonging mean to us as human beings, to us mentally? I think we have enough trouble trying to work out how we live our life within the relatively short span we're given. What sort of problems is that going to bring? God knows.
I suppose it might take us even further from accepting loss, death, grief as parts of daily life as well.
At whatever age you die, it's a very sad occasion. But I suppose over the last few generations, we've come to expect that children should outlast their parents. So it's kind of almost regarded as it's not right. Take it back just a few generations where people having large families, because that's what was expected, that families wouldn't last. Children often died in infancy and when they were young. And that kind of thinking's been a little bit skewed. The fact that, we are able to keep bodies alive for a lot, that would have died back in the day.
When it comes to death, if there's one idea you'd like to ease people around, I guess, what would it be?
Again, recognize your mortality. Understand it. Discuss it. Plan for it.
It's been really, really fascinating for me to speak to you. And I know when I'm editing this interview, hearing it back, you've given so many jumping off points for me to go away and think about. And actually, I'm absolutely certain that our listeners will take a lot from this. Those that have survived the whole episode. But it's come to the end of the chat. Thanks so much for hosting me today. And as a way of signing off, I always hand to my guest to leave our listeners with a few final thoughts and words. So what comes to mind, Simon? And thank you so much.
Come and visit. Come and walk around Clandon Wood as a nature visitor. Come and spend time here. Even if it's not for you, just come and spend time in nature. Sit under some of the trees, sit in the meadow and think about how we fit into this. Because at some stage you are going to fit. If you choose this, you are going to be fitting in here.
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, leave a comment and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And see you next time.